Hey everyone, welcome to week 2 of Special Ed Socials Summer. We're talking about lesson planning today, and we have an amazing team here to chat with. Jen, Ashley, Heather, and myself are all here to chat all things lesson plans. So thanks for being here today with us, and we're going to talk about all things differentiation in your classroom. Just like last summer, we have questions to go over and to cover. However, if we don't hit a certain area or topic that you were thinking about, make sure and leave us a question in the comments, and we'll be answering those during our weekly Q&As, which are Sunday after 2 p.m. So if you are watching the Facebook group, inside the Facebook group, make sure and give access to StreamYard so we can see your name and comment and questions. All right, ladies, let's get started. So to kick us off for today, as we talk about lesson planning across multi-grade levels, I thought it would be good to start off with what we need to do first before we develop those lesson plans. So Heather, I would love for you to explain just what baseline assessments do you use to determine the levels across so many different grade levels?
Yeah, so definitely you want to make sure you check back to the student's IEP first and foremost and see if there was any assessments or any data taken there, and if that shows an accurate report of where the student is at. So again, that might be an evaluation in there that says what evaluation tool was given. So you can definitely start there. If you feel like that might not be a good picture or really accurate for where they are, I highly recommend the ABLES assessment and the AFLs. They're like sister assessments to each other. I keep trying to explain to my teachers, like, the ABLES is like for more younger learners, and then AFLs is more like older learners. So if you're deciding there, and again, it's based on functional skills. Another thing you can look at is VB Map. I actually have it right here. This is another one that is based on verbal behavior, where it's like more of like, show me this, point to this, give me that, or tell me this, that kind of stuff. So that's another great assessment. If you're looking for something to kind of pick and choose or do a formal assessment on, you totally could. I've used them for both informal and formal assessments. If you have more academic learners, then you're going to want to use something like Brigance. It does have reading and math skills in there. So again, like if you're looking for more academic type of things, this is a great assessment to look at. And so that's another one that I definitely recommend. And if you are looking for more like a basic skills, I do have a basic skills assessment in my TPT store, where it goes through more of like expressive and receptive identification of things. And so you can really track that progress throughout the year. And this assessment is used, again, like maybe 2 or 3 times a year, up to 4 times a year. So you can see that progress there.
Awesome. There's so many good resources you provide there to show us. And I know Jen in last week's episode went over some of the different kinds of assessments as well. So whether you're looking for readiness skills, full on academics, or social skills, I think this gives you a great foundation. If you want more insight, check out last week's episode as well, or week 1's episode of where we talked a little bit more about that. But thank you, Heather, for sharing that. Next is how to determine a pacing for your lesson plan. Nope. Next is how to ensure all standards for various grade levels are being covered. So you're given this self-contained classroom and you have multiple grade levels. Let's just say 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and every standard grade level has different standards. How in the world do you teach all of that while having all of your kids in the classroom and everything? Heather, can you start us off with just kind of telling us how to ensure that you're covering a range of standards in your teaching?
Yeah, so definitely, like I said, you are going to look back at those standards, because I do support so many different classrooms. We can have up to 4 grade bands in a classroom in Illinois. I don't know where it is everywhere else, but in Illinois, we can have up to 4 grades. So I tell my teachers to make sure you are looking back at all of the standards for first, second, third, and fourth grade. And you really do have to kind of do a lot of back and forth of like, okay, first grade, we're talking about addition, and fourth grade, we're talking about addition and word problems. Okay, so let's do an addition unit, and then you can modify from there and make centers or variety of activities. Or you can say, okay, all of us are going to work on addition. Everybody has an addition worksheet, but it's just a little different because some kids need to work on word problems and some kids are just working on basic addition, and everything in between. So you really can do that. But again, looking at those standards, it's going to be tedious. It's going to take time. It's exhausting. It's not fun, but it is something that you can be doing this summer. You can look up your standards for your state. And if you need help finding them, just let us know and we can help you. And really just going back and forth of like, okay, this standard sounds like this standard, so we can make this a unit. And this standard sounds like those two standards, and really trying to piece it together so that you can come together with some type of scope and sequence.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think that leads us into the next question, which is about determining a pacing guide for your lesson plan. So we haven't even gotten to lesson plans yet, but we're talking about the assessments and that pre-planning so that you're making sure you're covering everything. And then what you're doing to keep track of your lesson plans on that daily, monthly, and weekly basis. And I'm going to take this, just talk a little bit about kind of pre-planning before you start creating your lesson plans. So Heather said you make sure to have that assessment of some sort to get a foundation or a baseline of what the student's abilities are, and then taking time to find your standards. Now, I like to bookmark them on my Google Chrome website or like browser, and so I can quickly access them. But in years past, I've also had an actual hard copy of the grade levels that I was teaching to where I could have quick access on my fingertips to see what is being done. And I do take some time in that prep period or even over the summer to create a curriculum map or even a pacing guide. And I take all that information of the different standards and I do kind of strategize and pinpoint the similarities in the different standards, and I block those together. And then once I've done that, I just make sure that I am creating themes or topics that are similar for the different months throughout the school year. I have a digital planner that I have the curriculum map that I can do digitally, or I have printable sheets in a lesson plan template in my TPT store that are printable as well. So whatever you prefer, but by taking time to implement kind of that strategy at the beginning of a school year can really help set the whole year up for success. And once you have that map created, you're then able to break down that whole year into months. And so you know exactly what skills you're teaching in the month of September, whether it is math, science, social studies, social skills, or anything else that you are required to teach. And so then you're able to see what you're being taught in that month. And then you can think to yourself, okay, how do I need to break this down into weeks and then into a daily plan? And so by taking the time to put that system into place, you're able to then create effective lesson plans, no matter if it's just kind of on the go and just kind of writing out basic questions or skills that you're going to work on each day, or if you prefer more of a weekly overview look, depending on what your school requires, just making sure you're, in touch with your admin to have something turned in that they respect and are requiring from you, but also is something that you can follow along or post in your room to where your whole team knows what is happening during that week. But I think that that helps you keep track of your lesson plans and to make sure no matter if it's daily, monthly, weekly, or yearly, you know what you are teaching. So next up is question number 4, which is what resources or tools do you find helpful when designing and implementing differentiated lessons? And this can include manipulative, multisensory, or even hands-on. So Ashley, can you give us some examples here?
Sure. So, a lot of things you had just said. When you differentiate a lesson, you want to make sure that there's a tactile piece, an auditory piece, and a visual piece that they're seeing, whether that's written, etc. So, when I would teach reading, I would do all these sentences would be used. We'd be using sand to write letters, shaving cream, stamps, all those kinds of things you could do for reading. For WH questions, you can use daubers. You can use like a bingo chip for them to set on. You can use a tracker so they can read it to make sure that they're pacing and following along with you. Math, we used a lot of whiteboards, markers, writing on our desks, along with manipulatives, those counting cubes. Sheet pans were big too, especially if you have a lot of manipulatives, they don't go all over the floor. If you're going to use a dice, put it in a little cube and they can just shake it and flip it over because it doesn't go everywhere. Like little tips like that, just to make sure your manipulatives aren't like flying under things. For science and math, doing anything that can be hands-on. I know one of my students' favorite experiments was when we talked about like the Arctic and how blubber keeps animals warm. We literally put like Crisco on a bag on the outside and we stuck it in like freezing cold water and their hands stayed warm. Like anything to get your kids to get that light bulb, aha, I get it. Oh, that makes sense moment. For history, sometimes it can be a little bit more challenging, but like virtual field trips, if you're talking about Rome, maybe you build something out of Legos or popsicle sticks or something that works well with the students and the abilities that they have. And also just collaborating with colleagues, saying, hey, we're going to work on this. I have this idea. What ideas do you have? Asking your para, and especially tag teaming on what you said about lesson plans. Write all the things you're going to need for each lesson plan, and then have your para get that stuff out and make it easy for you for the next day. Be like, hey, while I'm working on this progress monitoring goal with a student, could you get out all the things we're going to need for science? My lesson plan's here, and it lists everything we're going to need. So hopefully that helps. But if those ideas don't work for you, reach out to us and we'll try to brainstorm some more for you.
Yeah, I think there's all are so many great different ideas that can be implemented no matter the ability level or the classroom that you may have. And I think that collaborating with inside of special ed socials or with your fellow colleagues to provide just insight of things you've never even thought about before definitely gives you a different avenue of new possibilities. So thank you so much for sharing, Ashley. Question number 5 is, how do you embed the individualized goals and objectives for each student in your lesson in your classroom? So Jen, will you give a little bit of insight of just how you're making sure that all the different pieces are being covered while teaching each of your lessons?
Yes. So I do want to start by saying we're not saying you have to make sure every IEP goal is included in every single lesson that you teach. But can we kind of double dip and work smarter, not harder, to maybe tackle working on some IEP goals in a lesson if it works well with something that you're already doing in the classroom with your students? Absolutely. I used to do this a ton when it came to my students' speech goals. I would work with my speech therapist and we would collaborate to figure out ways to embed ways to ask them questions that maybe worked with the speech goal or something like that. But when you're really trying to get even academics in there as well, that can be tricky because you may have one math topic and the math goal doesn't go along with the topic that you're teaching at that time. So I'm not saying teach 3 different types of lessons at once. I'm saying, okay, if we're teaching a lesson on money, the best thing you can do is obviously we need to have in our head what our kids' IEP goals are. And if you're not good at memorizing, I used to create myself a little cheat sheet, like a little spreadsheet that maybe had the kids' initials, math, and a quick blurb of what we were working on. Maybe it was counting next dollar up strategy, right? We're working to figure out if we have something and it costs a certain amount, what would the next dollar amount be that I would use to pay for that with, right? But I would just give myself a little note that says next dollar up. And I would know what that means. Like it was my own little code or cheat sheet. I would keep it right by wherever I taught from, whether it was a small group table or desks or my desk, something like that, that I could refer to so that as I was teaching, I could say, okay, does this lend itself well to what I'm teaching that day? And sometimes in the moment, you can just find ways to embed those goals in there that if you know them or you have a cheat sheet like that nearby. The other thing, of course, is planning, right? Which is kind of what we're talking about today. Having a plan. And Heather and Dawn already shared a ton of those ideas of how you get, a curriculum map, or you figure out what those standards are. You need to have a plan. You cannot, some of us, I think every single one of us can say we've been in the situation where we've taken a lesson and we've just winged it, right? And you do it and it works out fabulous and you're good with it. But a lot of what we need to do needs to be planned out. So if you know those IEP goals, you can kind of figure out where to squeeze some of those in there. So the biggest thing is knowing them, and then knowing the content you're going to teach, and then figuring out how to blend them together. And then inside my lesson plans that I used to write, I used to put notes. So if it was math and it was about money and I had that student with that next dollar up goal, I'd put a note in there, reminder, work with Johnny on the next dollar up goal, and embed it in the lesson as well. So that if I needed to that day, I was checking to see what lessons we're working on, I could say, oh yeah, that's right, I need to make sure I do this. And then of course you can also incorporate your paras in there as well, right? Making sure they're aware of those, because they can go work next to that student and maybe hone a little bit more in on that specific goal while your whole group teaching everyone. If, again, planning ahead and making sure everybody knows what's going on, they can go in and jump in and support you that way too.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think there's so many different opportunities, like Ashley was saying, with hands-on learning, where if you have that dollar up activity for one learner, but another learner may be just sorting between 2 coins into bowls. And so there's just a variety of different adaptations that you can do in order to meet all of your learners while teaching one concept. And so I think that's what we're trying to drive home today, is to be intentional with your plans, but making sure that you can kind of roll with the punches and know how to adapt it quickly to your various levels that you may encounter throughout the day. So thank you so much for sharing that, Jen. That was really helpful. I think the next part would be, how do you assess during the lesson and just progress monitor? I know we were talking a little bit about that. Or you mentioned that a little bit earlier, but how to ensure that individualized learning goal is being met, and maybe even how you're using your team to make sure all of that's being done. Ashley, will you help explain just kind of how you do that in your lessons?
Sure. So like Jen had said, being upfront with paras, or having that note to remind yourself that, oh, Johnny needs to be assessed during this lesson. A lot of times, I would put a sticky note on my board with the name, and then I would write pluses or minuses or whatever they needed, the prompts. Heather loves digital data, so she might walk around with her iPad and have it ready to go and write that. I think every person works best. Like sometimes, especially in ECSE, if I was doing something, I would literally take a picture of what we did, or if I was using something, and a lot of times use my phone as a resource because that was always in my pocket. So you could use your digital data as well there, and throw your notes app open. Oh, Johnny got a 5 out of 6. Done. Or if you have specific data sheets that are digital, you can use those to already give it to your para. There's a lot of different things, but make sure that I always check my data each week just to make sure that I'm not hitting the same goal over and over and over, if that makes sense. Like sometimes you hone in on one goal and you have 4 data points, and you realize this other goal only has 1, and you're like, oh, I should probably step it up on that one. So just even putting a reminder in your phone, and I have reminders for literally everything because you get scatterbrained, the week goes by. Thursdays is when I check my data, and I have a reminder on my phone that goes off at 1 o'clock that's like, check your data. And that way Friday, I know I really got to hone in on this data point, or this child X, Y, or Z if they've been absent 2 or 3 days. But just sort of like quickly sum it up and say, like, use sticky notes, write the goal on top, give it to your para on a clipboard and say, these are the 3 kids that need data taken. Write down their scores, or take a picture of their worksheet, or however works best for your classroom, or use a digital method where you're using your phone or an iPad or some other digital platform to take your data. And make sure that it's being worked on. Whatever works best for your classroom. So hopefully that helps. For digital data, reach out to Heather. She's your guru. If you like paper or sticky notes, come ask me or Jen or John. They both do digital too, but digital's not as easy for me at times.
Yeah, I think that finding kind of what works for you and being willing to try different avenues. The digital data, I think Heather walks you through a tutorial of how to set things up, and it can seem a little overwhelming at first, but once you have those things in place, it can definitely help save time. But I know that having a clipboard and the sticky notes or whatever can definitely be easy to hand off to other adults that are in your room to help you alongside taking that information and kind of getting a pulse of their understanding. So, if digital data is something that you are looking into, make sure and check out what Heather has to offer there. Next is just talking about reflecting after you get done with the test, or not a test, but during your lesson or even an assessment, but also thinking about like exit tickets or, informal assessments along the way so that you can make sure that you have a pulse of what the student is understanding and what may need to be retaught at a later date or throughout that day. And so I just wanted to share some of that reflection is for you as an educator. And there can even be a spot on your lesson plan to just talk about, hey, was today really engaging? All the students were on task, or, today was a total wash. And even though I had everything prepped and my team ready, like nothing went right. And that isn't necessarily a bad reflection of you. Those days just happen. But taking time to look at both the wins and things that you can tweak help you become a better educator and to make sure that you're teaching the strategies to the students that need the help. And so you're able to take time to self-reflect of what was done right, where, like, grow and glow ultimately. And you can even do that with your team so that you can make tomorrow even better. And then talking about exit slips, I know a lot of times general education teachers are required to have some kind of informal assessment to check the student's understanding. And a lot of times with our learners, both in early childhood and in self-contained settings, that can be a little tricky, because sometimes that you can't just hand them a sheet of paper with problems to solve, or to read a passage and have them answer a question, or sometimes even write a sentence. However, don't overthink it. Less is more sometimes. So you can just ask yes and no questions and have them do thumbs up and thumbs down. You can have them hold up a whiteboard that has a handle and turn it one way or the other based on their understanding. And so that can kind of give you a pulse of if they've gotten all the things that you have been teaching and talking about, whether that's in reading, math, science, or social studies. And that kind of allows you to know what may need to be taught during small group or even during individual sessions, even if it's not an IEP goal, but it's different standards that the student is working on. So just the thumbs up and thumbs down can allow you just to kind of gauge where the student is right then. So those are ways that you can just reflect on your lessons and improve your lessons as you're teaching them with your learners. So next, I have a question for Jen just about how to utilize the adult staff that you have in your classroom so that we are working smarter, not harder with our entire classroom to make sure it's running smoothly, but especially with lesson planning. How does that work for you, Jen?
So when you're lesson planning, you definitely want to make sure you're incorporating your paraprofessionals. They're there to support the instruction that's happening in the classroom. So if you are creating these elaborate lesson plans and not thinking about ways to include your paras, I challenge you this summer, reach out to any of us if you need help with it. But start thinking about what can they do to support, what things can they do to help. And you know what? I've over the years worked with many different paraprofessionals, and they've all had different talents. So that is definitely a key. Think about and get to know those paraprofessionals, find out what they're good at, what they like, what they enjoy. I've had paras that love teaching math. So they had a math center all year. They had a table. Kids went and worked on individual math goals with that paraprofessional on top of working with me. And I even would have them collect data for me and use that as their strength. I had other ones that were really good at understanding how to use an AAC device. They were a little tech savvy because they love to be on their phone. So instead of being on your phone in my classroom, go help that kiddo with his AAC device. You know how to work tech. I'm going to use that to my advantage, right? So think about all of those things. I had another para that was, she was younger. So she was almost close to the age of the students I had. I had middle school at the time. So she was like right out of high school, graduated, but she got all the lingo, all the things kids were saying with that age group. So socially, she could excel holding conversations with the kids to make them, you know, engage with their peers in regular ed classes. So there's all different ways. Some paras have great art skills. Some of them are great at music. So really, my suggestion there is finding what they're best at and then finding a way to work that into your lessons and utilize them that way. Another thing you can do that can be helpful is inside your lessons, think of ways. If you're teaching a whole group lesson, maybe you can break into small groups. So can you utilize a paraprofessional to pull maybe 2 kids that are working on one skill? Here's where you can embed some more IEP goals if you want to, like I was talking about earlier, and a para can pull 3 other kids and work on something else all within that one lesson. So utilize them that way. And then lastly, I think the easiest way to utilize them is just basic support in maybe a whole group lesson where you're asking them to help the students stay on task, help them open something, help them get their glue cap off, help them with prompting if they need some prompting or if they need assistance cutting something. So thinking about all the little things that could be barriers to making your lesson not go well, utilize your paraprofessionals to be the people that kind of solve those little problems for you. So you're not running all over the place when you're supposed to be teaching. They can even be the people that are holding up the visuals for behavior support. You know, if you have a student that likes to elope, they can position their body in a certain place in the classroom so that student can't elope, or maybe they won't think about it as much because someone's right there, right? Or we think of in any classroom, I know myself, if a teacher came near me and I was chatting with my friend, they started walking by me, I stopped talking. So utilize your paras for all those different things with your lessons. Some of those are maybe not things you're going to plan for in your lessons, but they're all great ways to use them during the lessons you're teaching.
For sure. I think that so many times, like having just knowing that there is a proximity need or making sure that they have the pieces of the lesson that are being taught is definitely a strategic way of things you can put in your lesson plans, but making sure we're using the whole team to provide the best experience for our learners. So thanks for sharing those examples. And I think that leads us right into how to collaborate and how to collaboratively teach and plan with other professionals within our building to make sure that we're reaching all of our learners' needs. And so, Jen, will you tell us how you collaboratively plan and teach with speech therapists?
Absolutely. So I had a few speech therapists over my time when I taught in brick and mortar that were awesome and wanted to collaborate. They wanted to really push into my classroom, and not that they didn't also pull students out of the classroom and we could still collaborate on that. But a lot of it was based off of pushing into my classroom, and they would come to different parts of our day that lent themselves well to working on those students' IEP goals, specifically for speech and language. And I mentioned a little bit of that earlier, but specifically we would find time in our day that we could collaborate and talk and get to know one another and figure out what we were going to teach, right? You can't co-teach, which is essentially what we did. We set up a co-teaching environment during our morning meeting lessons. We did it during our afternoon meeting, which was more, we would teach from the News to You current events articles, and we would use those and ask a lot of WH questions and work on articulation with the students and things like that with vocabulary. But all of that came from us coming up with one time that worked for both of us to get together. And so we would plan usually over a lunch once a week. we'd say, all right, let's get together. We'll do a working lunch and eat our lunch together, and then figure out what we were going to teach that week, and then figure out how the speech therapy piece was going to be blended into that. And then I also incorporated in my own classroom, I had a lot of students on AAC devices or just needed to build their vocabulary. We would actually work on building core vocabulary and had a specific piece that kind of was on the end of my morning meeting lesson to focus on that vocabulary. But my speech therapist kind of took the lead on it, and we kind of switched. So if I taught morning meeting and she was more in an assisting role, we would switch during that a vocabulary teaching time, and she would take the lead. So kind of going back and forth for us was something that worked really well, because we were able to sit with our own specific niches that we felt comfortable teaching and utilize that. So Ashley, what about you when it comes to working with occupational therapists or physical therapists?
Yes. So a lot of things that Jen had said, like collaborating, finding a time to work together. The nice thing is, especially with OTs and PTs, there's not as many of them in the district you work at. So a lot of times, if you're brand new to the position, they might know your students. They might have been working with them for 3 or 4 years, and they can give you a lot of insight um, to help your students and your learners there. Especially in the district I work at, there's only a handful of PTs. So they work at multiple schools. So it's nice. A lot of times they've seen kids from early childhood. If you're working in a middle school setting, they can say, oh my gosh, the growth this child has made, the gains they have overcome. And this is a great way to do X, Y, or Z with them. But looking at that, especially this year in ECSE, which was new to me, I utilized my PT and OT a lot, just as consults. Like they'd come in, consultants, they would help me. They'd say, oh, this student looks like they could use some work in their trunk. Like, why don't you try this, this, and this to work? Like a bending exercise, like taking something from the top shelf or like an apple off the tree and putting it in a bucket when you're working on your apple theme. And things like that. So a lot of times they were really beneficial just to come in and give an idea if your student is needing some sort of sensory input, saying, hey, what do you suggest I try? And a lot of times they have items for you to try, so you don't have to go out and spend your own money. They might let you borrow it for a week or two, see if it works. If not, you can go from there. But hopefully that helps. Heather, can you tell us how you collaborate with behavioral consultants?
Yeah, so I've worked with BCBAs and RBTs in my classroom. And honestly, they are very analytical. And so they like to analyze things and break it down and do a lot of task analysis stuff. And I know that just by working with many people. Of course, I would get to know the person I was working with. But I like to use them for those things. So knowing that they like to break steps down or like really get into the fine details of things, I usually utilize them by doing that. I have a conversation with them about, hey, like we're really having a problem tying our shoes. I've tried everything. I've tried the bunny ears. I've tried loop, swoop, and pull. Like I've tried it all. It's not working. And like they will sit down and do that. So that's really where I've just kind of had those like aha moments of like, okay, let's talk about this. This is a problem I have, and you can break it down for me, and you'll sit there and take the data. And then when you can't take the data, you pass it over to me and you train me on it. Because I feel like they are just very in tune to what steps need to happen. So of course, having those conversations, getting to know them, what their strengths are. But that's usually how I utilize my RBTs or BCBAs that come into my classroom when I can share that time with them, is like, hey, let's break this down. Hey, let's shape this. Let's make this and improve this skill, something like that. So that's truly what I do. Dawn, what do you do with vision and hearing specialists? It's been a while since I've worked with them.
Sure. So I have some learners that have had vision and hearing needs. And a lot of times, though, you may have, depending on the size of the district, you may have someone within your district that works specifically with those learners. However, it may also be a contracted position. And so just a couple takeaways if you have learners that have those needs. One would be to make sure you know what is available and what the IEP says for those specific needs. If there is an amplifier that is needed for the general education classroom, is that something that you have to rent or purchase, or making sure that we have the equipment that is in the IEP, or if it's a magnifier for our learners that need things at a larger size because of their vision deficits, or if you have learners who may have CVI and you need things with a black background, and making sure that that picture pops up to where they can eye gaze or have a book that they're able to see and interact with. Some of that does take some learning and planning, but knowing what is available in your district and what is available for your learner and their current needs, and making sure. I know a lot of times some of my specialists only come in once a month to help our learners and to consult or collaborate with me. And so making sure that you keep a running record or a running list of questions or hiccups or successes that you've had during that month. I keep it on a clipboard. It sits in my desk in a organizer. So when they come, I can pull that out. So no matter if it's 2:00 and they're all the kids trying to get ready and go home, I still know what I want to ask or what I need to get from them. So making sure you just have a point of a place to jot down some of those thoughts. Hey, this amplifier isn't working, or hey, this is way too loud and it's giving me some feedback. How do I reduce that? Or I need batteries for this hearing aid. What can I do? Or are there any other resources that the teacher can access that I haven't thought of or don't know of? So using them as the content expert to give you feedback, and then having that tool to just kind of like know what you can ask. But then don't be afraid to ask for training from them. If you have a device that you've never used before, ask for a training and ask all the ins and outs, and then follow up with an email if you still have more questions as you implement it. I know special education can range because there are so many different disability categories. And so the learners that you may have now are different than what you'll have next year, and so on and so forth. And so we're not expected to know everything about every single disability or syndrome and all that. But just once you do have them, and making sure that you have the best knowledge that you can and resources to help them, I think is key. And so those would be the three things that I would recommend with collaborating with vision and hearing specialists. So those are knowing what is available, keeping that running list, and asking for training when is needed. And so just having the knowledge of it's not just you trying to figure out all the lesson plans and the activities for the learners, and taking time to collaborate with the different related service providers, whether that is the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, behavior technicians, or the BCBAs, or even the vision and hearing specialists, knowing that they can come alongside you and support you, or also help work on skills that you're seeing deficits in or needs in, and they can use their sessions to help work on that too, because we're all in this together to help our learners be as independent as possible. So I think that kind of sums up the questions that we have. We could touch on one more. Do we want to do one more, ladies? Yeah. Okay. Can you provide some examples of modifications or adaptations that you can make to curriculum materials to meet the students' needs where they are right now? Heather, do you want to do that?
Yeah. So, of course, we've already kind of talked about having that multisensory support. You want to make sure that there's something visual that they can see, that something they can touch, something they can listen to or hear. So really something that you want to look at is that whole picture of like, am I engaging them in a multitude of ways? So I'm even thinking of some of the materials that I've been working on is, okay, it might be a full page of activities that might be overstimulating. So is there a way that we can break that worksheet into half, or maybe just 2 problems? There's one of the curriculums that we're using, and it has like 8 questions, but it's got like 4 questions on one page, 4 questions on another. And so like, I was like, okay, let's break it into 2 days. 2 days, or first day is the first 4 questions, and the second day is the other 4 questions. Even though it says 5, 6, 7, 8, like it's okay. Yes, it's not Pinterest perfect, but That's how our classrooms are run sometimes. So really, like I said, looking at that student, looking at, is this too overwhelming? Is this too stimulating? But yeah, breaking it down of like, okay, maybe instead of using a pencil, they're going to use a marker, or they're going to use a highlighter, or they're going to write it on the whiteboard or chart paper. Find different modes for them to answer and give a response. I'm working with a student right now who's giving a speech, who doesn't want to give a speech, but there's a way that I'm going to have that student record in another time in a separate location by themselves. And then I will play it for myself to listen to so that I can grade them. But it's finding what works and just really kind of coming at it at a different angle. Jen, what do you suggest for modifications or adaptations?
Well, I feel like you got a lot of them. But I think that the first, like one of the things you really want to do, obviously, is figuring out specifically what your students need, right? There's no need to throw a modification in there if it's not needed. So making sure you're checking your IEPs. I know we've said this several times during, but you know what? I feel like every topic we're going to talk about this summer is going to be check your IEPs because there's just, it's going to guide a lot of what you need to be doing, what your students need from you. So when you're making those modifications or adaptations, I always take the curriculum that I have and kind of cross it over with the IEPs my students have and whatever their SDIs are called. And that's what we call them in PA. I'm not sure if they're called the same thing everywhere else across the country, but those are specially designed instructions. So they're all the things that that child specifically has been deemed by that IEP team is needed. So like Heather was saying, maybe only 4 answers on a page. Maybe it's multiple choice as opposed to writing the answer, right? Those are all the things that you can take into account when you're looking for, the curriculum that's either going to fit your classroom, which we all know there's probably not one that's going to fit your classroom. You're going to have to adapt it. But just making sure that that is something that you're doing is checking those IEPs. And those are a lot of the ways I create, or use or make my examples for those modifications and adaptations. So, Ashley, what about you?
So you guys hit a lot of them. I was just going to say, look at their progress reports and see if this is not an annual IEP, or not like a brand new one. If this was one that's been, they've had 2 or 3 quarters with another teacher, see what that is. A lot of times at the bottom, at least in Virginia, we have a comment section. So I'll write things like, Johnny was really successful doing goal number 1 using X, Y, and Z. So that way you can come right out the gate having something that already works for Johnny. So that's my little tip. Jen and Heather gave a lot. Dawn, do you have anything else you want to add?
Sure. I'll kind of close it up. I just think that taking time to look at the range or the scope of different supports that you can provide, whether that is you just want them to participate in the activity, or you want them to do kind of errorless to where, they're just doing participating, or if you're wanting them to match and having a variety of different activities, whether that is like worksheets or adapted books or file folders. So it doesn't have to just be like a one size fits everybody, because I feel like in special education, most times that's not the case. So making sure that we have like a variety of different tools to combat the same kind of target area that you're working on, so that you have a range, and knowing that the different kinds of modifications that you can offer range, and what works this week may not work next week. So knowing that you're just flexible and working with a team and encouraging your team not to provide too much support. And sometimes finding that sweet spot can be difficult, but just encouraging the whole team to provide just enough support to where active learning is still happening all day long. So I think that it definitely helps cover the different ways that you can adapt and modify curriculum to meet all of your learners' needs. So I think that definitely, I hope that gives you just some ways to bounce ideas off of us, or maybe just in your head of ways that you can meet your students' needs even better this upcoming year. By building interactive activities and lessons, by creating the lessons, by taking the time to baseline your students' needs, by knowing what they like and dislike, and having a variety of plans to meet your individual needs. So if you want to continue to learn more about that, I know we're posting all week, all 4 of us, different activities or different resources and tools and extensions to continue to learn. If you have more questions that maybe we didn't touch on today, specifically about differentiating and lesson planning, make sure and put that in the post that'll come out tomorrow, and we'll make sure and target that in a video that we will upload Sunday after 2 p.m. Eastern time. That way we can just make sure that your questions are being answered, that we have that constant communication with you guys of what your current need is, and help you feel confident in the upcoming school year. So thank you so much for taking time to learn and grow with us today on this topic. I hope it's been very insightful for you, and you've learned a few key takeaways that you can implement quickly in your classroom. Thank you, ladies, for being so knowledgeable and powerhouses in this area. And look for those extensions and question posts to make sure that you are writing in there. And thank you guys so much for the comments that are coming through too. We appreciate you being active and a part of these live sessions, and hope that you find them helpful. So until Sunday, thank you for everything, and we'll finish this one on up.